You may be very healthy now. You may be in your 50s or 60s, even 70s, and you may feel Medicare is going to take care of you. But I have to say this, when it comes to health and caring, there is no ceiling on the dollar amount that you're going to pay out when it comes to health. So the most important thing that I say to them is you've got to make a plan.
You worked hard your whole life. The last thing you need is to get played by the system. And with us, welcome to the Insurance Wise Guys, where we bring the sharpest minds in senior living to give you real talk, real answers, and zero BS. I'm your host, Paul Barrett. Let's get into it.
All right. Welcome to the Insurance Wise Guys. I'm your host, Paul Barrett, and the founder of the Modern Medicare Agency. For the last 18 years, I've been working exclusively in Medicare, helping thousands of clients nationwide navigate one of the most complicated and important financial decisions of their lives. This show exists for one reason: give you honest, straightforward conversation about insurance that nobody else is having. There'll be no jargon, no sales pitch, just real information from real experts that you hopefully can use. Today, we're talking about something most people avoid thinking about until it's too late. And by then, options are gone. We're talking about long-term care. What happens if someone you love needs help with the basics of daily living, bathing, dressing, eating, just getting around? Who pays for that? How much does it cost? And what can you do right now to protect yourself or your family from financial catastrophe? From most people never see this coming. My guest today is one of the most knowledgeable long-term care specialists that I have ever worked with. She's someone I trust completely with my own clients, and she has lived this personally, which changes everything about how she explains it. Leni Cohen, welcome to the Insurance Wise Guys.
Thanks so much, Paul. I appreciate you having me on. So I know that the topic today is about the why and the why not of long-term care insurance, but I'd like to start on a more personal level and tell you how I got here and why we're on this podcast today. So early on in my career, I was an educator up in the Northeast, and I did that for many years. Shortly after my 43rd birthday, I added another category to educator, and that was caregiver. And I actually became the sole caregiver for my mother, who had a terminal illness and she was alone. And so I ended up being the caregiver along with my family. So initially, I would go back and forth for surgeries, talking to doctors, treatments, things like that. Okay. And it was a tremendous strain on me because I was working full time, had a family. And so we made the decision to move her up to our home in the Northeast. In doing that, we actually turned a playroom into a hospital room. And for the next few months until she passed away, that's how we solved the problem. I still had to solve the problem of working full time, having a family. So even though I was at work, I was still on the phone with doctors. I was still making appointments. I was still checking up on her. And when I couldn't, then I had to hire what we call now a CNA. Keep in mind that this was back in the early 1980s. So long-term care insurance wasn't even on the horizon at that time. And what she had was, and you're familiar with it, Paul, original Medicare, which did provide certain things at home in a facility, but certainly not enough. So while I was at work and couldn't help her, I hired a CNA to take care of her during the day. But at night, I will tell you, for the whole time until she passed away, I never slept one night. So I would go to work bleary-eyed. Any case. So I don't normally talk about statistics when I talk to my clients, but I'm going to give you this statistic because I personally fall right into it. The average age of a caregiver is somewhere in their early 40s or 50s, okay, with a family, working full time, okay, and again, in their 40s. So I meet all the criteria of those four categories, okay? And what happened is, over time, it really began to wear on the family, physically, financially, personally, and emotionally. And so, I sit here today because I actually lived through this. So let's jump ahead 20 years. I moved from the Northeast down to Florida and decided that I no longer wanted to teach on the high school level, but I still wanted to be in the realm of education. And someone suggested that I go into insurance. I had never done that before, but I felt that with my educational background, this might really suit me very well. And learning was very important to me. And once I jumped into it, the most interesting thing happened. I familiarized myself with the whole concept of long-term care need and realized, oh my gosh, I'm an educator and I'm a caregiver. I fall right into this category. So that's how I got to this point, and I've been doing this for over 20 years now. I talk to clients all over the country, and I don't throw out numbers and percentages like, you hear some agents, 70%, 30%, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. I really talk to them about my personal, venture into this and what happened to me and what we should look at. So that's why I'm here today, Paul. I'm going to throw it back to you because I know you have lots of questions.
First, I can really appreciate that perspective because I had to deal with that myself. My father, he had cancer, and there was nobody around until he passed, and then everybody was around to get stuff. But there was nobody there but myself to take care of him, and I was in a very similar situation, so I get it. And I knew nothing about long-term care, Medicare, anything at that point. That was many years ago. But one of the things that I always think that's important is when speaking to certain people in the industry, and I'm sure you've spoken to many, there are certain people that are like sharks. They're in the water, and their one goal is the next client, the next client, the next client, the next client. And they think about commissions only. I've built my business, and I feel you've done it the same, basically by trying to help one person at a time, opposed to trying to sell one person at a time. I don't care what anybody does, as long as you understand how it works and it's going to work for you. So that's one of the things I liked about our approach when I first met you, and I shared some clients with you because you came so highly recommended. Not one person said that Leni tried to sell me or she made me feel uncomfortable. And that's very important because this is a very tough topic. So with all that being said, you've been doing it for decades. What keeps you still passionate about it? Because you seem so passionate about this topic.
Well, when I talk to clients, you're right, my goal is not to sell them. I probably have 3, 4, 5 conversations with them. And what moves me is the passion to say, I was the caregiver. Think about your family, right? Think about what's going to happen to you. You as the patient are going to be so well treated. Everybody's going to take care of you. But surrounding you, all the people, family, friends, other people around you, they tend to suffer. They tend to suffer. And so your goal is to say, what should I do? I need to have a plan in place. And whether you decide to go in the direction of long-term care or you decide to go in another direction, my goal is not to force you into one direction. If I feel it would behoove you and it fits into your funding plan, which we'll talk about is very important, then I say you have to take a serious look at this, right? You may be very healthy now. You may be in your 50s or 60s, even 70s, and you may feel Medicare is going to take care of you. But I have to say this, when it comes to health and caring, there is no ceiling on the dollar amount that you're going to pay out when it comes to health. So the most important thing that I say to them is you've got to make a plan. And that plan has to be based upon your funding source. And that's what we talk about. We don't talk about you have to do it today or you have to do it tomorrow. What I say to them is, what are you going to do if you get sick and you don't pass away? What are you going to do if you get sick and need care? And you need to answer the questions of where do you want to receive care? Nobody wants to be in a nursing home, that's for sure. So I explain to them, these plans exist so that you never have to be in a nursing home. Because the only time you go into a nursing home at this point, with all the other different facilities around, is probably when you're in your last 6 months of life or there's nobody to take care of you. So you have choices if you choose to make a plan using a long-term care plan.
You just answered the next question. I was going to say most people, when they hear long-term care, my clients, they're thinking of putting their parents in a nursing home or their spouse in a nursing home. And, you obviously have more experience than I do, but I know there are options. And most people, I think, don't understand that if you plan carefully, you don't have to have, a long, bad experience of months living someplace you're not comfortable, that's cold, with strangers.
Exactly. The whole concept here is if you're going to get sick, you have to have choices. That's the most important word here. Have choices. If you don't have choices, then either you're going to run through all of your money or you're going to be put into a nursing home. And I reiterate when I say this, and I say it with a passion, the choice to stay at home for the entire time of an illness, and it doesn't have to be long-term illness or horrific illnesses. It could be something as simple as back surgery that's going to keep you out of commission for 6 months, maybe longer. But the whole concept here is, do I have choices? And people work their whole lives so that they have choices. They build a retirement nest egg so that they have choices. And that's what it's really about. I would never want to be in a position after I've been independent for all these years to have someone say to me, you have no choice. If you get ill, this is what's going to happen to you. And it doesn't really have to be that way.
Great point. I think one of the biggest problems in insurance in particular, number one, insurance agents have a bad rap because most people associate us with salespeople. They're always going to try and sell you.
They do.
And I became a broker, so I don't have to sell anybody anything. And almost everywhere I'm licensed, I have 95% of the outlets. So you pick and choose. I'll educate you. I think that's very important, and that's something that you do. But with long-term care, I find most people don't even understand where to start. So where does somebody start? Where would they start looking? How do they get educated by somebody like you without feeling pressure? Because you go online and you see all these things and everything turns into a rabbit hole. Your phone starts ringing, you're getting text messages, emails. Where do they start?
So remember I said to you, I never make any decisions. I don't ask them to make any decisions on the first call. First, I send them information. Over the years, I've accrued what I call KISS information, keep it simple information, 1-page brochures that break it down. I then set up a call with them and I say, all I want to do on this initial call is tell you what's out in the market based upon where you live, your health conditions, and your age. And that's what we do. We spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and I say, listen, grab a cup of coffee. I'm going to talk. You can break in at any time and ask me questions, but I'm going to talk to you and I'm going to tell you what's there for you. I'm going to explain in the simplest of forms. And I do. Because I've lived it, I have to make it simple for them because I had to make it simple for myself in order to understand it. So that's what it's about. We also talk about funding because the first question anybody asks, I know this from experience, is how much is it going to cost me? And I say to them, it could cost you nothing. Okay? You do not have to decide to do this. You could say, you know what? It's so confusing to me. I'm going to depend upon my own resources. Well, here's the main issue that I say. When people say to me, I'm going to self-fund, I say to me, that's great. But you have to make sure, again, you have a plan. And when you decide the time comes where you're going to self-fund, you have to see what sources are available to you without tax burdens, without emptying out all of your retirement resources. So that's a very important question that we have to answer. But I never say to them, let's go to application. Let's do it today and let's see what happens. Because I don't really know what's going to happen, to be honest. So I make sure on the first initial call, we talk about their health, we talk about their funding sources, and we talk about the basic concepts. And there are just two basic concepts in the market, to be honest, when it comes to long-term care plans. There are other side plans, but there are two basic plans in the market. And that sort of brings them down to a better level of understanding.
When you start thinking about like who's right for what and when should I get started, things like that, what age do you recommend somebody to start thinking about this so it would make more sense financially? And are there any pre-existing conditions that could get in the way of somebody at even if they were 40 and they wanted to do it? I mean, obviously if you're disabled and you're on something like that, you probably could not get it, right? But for the most part, it's gotten a lot more liberal since the 90s, I've noticed.
It actually has. And here's the interesting thing. When I first started in the long-term care arena, most people approached me no younger than 69. Now I talk to people anywhere from 40s to 90s. And you're right. Years ago, there weren't plans for people who had, illnesses. It was an automatic decline, and age was a factor too. But there are plans in the market where you could purchase up until 99. Okay. Does health and underwriting come into play? Yes, it does. The interesting thing is somewhere along the way, I became a field underwriter. And so I would never even approach an application until I did absolutely as much underwriting as I can. Are there surprises sometimes? Yes, there are. But basically, I say to the client, I'm not going to application because we're going to talk about your health with your permission. And I always say with your permission. I never say, let's go ahead and do this. All right. Because this is their private life. This is their personal life. And having been there, I don't want to intrude upon their personal lives, but I do a great deal of underwriting. But yes, there are so many different types of plans in the market today that even if you're uninsurable, there's a plan for you. Okay? Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Back in the day when I did dabble in this in my financial planning days, there was two different types of agents. There was one that were like you, very thorough, and I was like that. I always got made fun of for spending extra time and doing an extra appointment. But when it comes to long-term care, big life insurance policies, I don't want to tell you it's going to cost $200, and we find out it costs 400 because I didn't ask the right questions. Nobody's ever happy when that happens. The more questions we ask, like you mentioned, the more accurate you can help somebody, the more advice you can say. It's more likely going to be like this instead of trying to say it's this or it's that. That's a sales person. That's not somebody that's there to consult you and advise you and help you out through the process. Very important to understand the difference because if somebody's trying to sell you long term care or life insurance and saying you need this, you should do this, then it's a problem. Maybe you do need it, right? I think a lot of people should have it, but let's be real. Not everybody can afford it. And when we start the conversation, some people had no concept, no idea whatsoever that it was going to cost a few dollars. I've had people that thought long-term care was going to be about $50 a month when I spoke to them back. I understand that you're 50 years old, but you could barely get a term insurance policy for $50, let alone long-term care. So there is some ignorance.
Here's an interesting concept. When I talk to people, I say to them, look, we're going to talk about this, but at the end of the day, if you choose to move forward, we're going to find a plan that's affordable to you so that you don't come back in 2 years and say, Leni, Paul, what did you do? I bought a plan and I really can't afford it anymore. And the other concept is this, which is very interesting. You're right. Agents say you've got to buy a plan for 10 years. You don't. You don't. You can buy a basic plan that will last a year, 2 years. Okay. You can buy a basic plan that will cover part of the cost at home. It's always less expensive when you're being cared for at home than if you're in a facility, a nursing home. That's an interesting point. Nobody realizes that. It's even less expensive if you move into a assisted living facility, but the goal is to stay at home. Okay. So that's the first thing. Okay. The other thing I say to them is, look, let's find an affordable amount, and I will build the best plan for you at that affordable amount so that you never have to come back. But to say that you have to buy a plan for lifetime, it doesn't exist anymore. The other thing to take into consideration is after you retire and you're 65, you can take a smaller plan and then slot in your Social Security. So you add a couple more $1,000s to the cost, to the amount of care that you could pay out. People don't think about that. Well, where am I going to get the money? I said, there is Social Security. You do not have to dip into your retirement funds. Let's talk about a small plan, Social Security, and then we'll talk about other things.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those types of insurances where it's not just I buy it and it's set it and forget it type of deal. You really have to plan and strategize and think not just today, tomorrow, but 10 years from now. Can I still afford this? Will this still be working? Will it still be enough coverage? How's this all going to work? And I think a lot of people just fail to understand that when you're shopping for something like this for your parents, or if your parents are shopping for something like this, it's not something you go impulse buy. It's not something that's on sale, a shirt you like on the rack. You really should speak to a few people, get an education so that you can ask intelligent questions. Because in the beginning, none of us had any clue about this before we got licensed and started studying this stuff. So if I had to ask about long-term care when I was 30 years old, I have no clue. Absolutely no clue. What questions you ask when you have no clue? And that's when people make mistakes, when they just say, oh, this is the cheapest. I'm going to get this one. Or this one's the most expensive, so it must be the best. There's a lot more that goes into it than that. And that's really one of the main things I think most people need to get more in touch with is that don't rush it. Find somebody like yourself that's been doing it for decades. Let's be honest. I've been doing this for 18 years. You've been doing this for longer than 18 years. If you meet somebody on the phone today, I don't need your business. Would I like it? Sure. But at the end of the day, I would much rather you get off the phone and like me and not feel offended and be like, that guy tried to sell me something I didn't need. That's just how I feel about it. It's so now that I do most of my stuff over the phone and through the computer, I love meeting people 2 or 3 times before we actually enroll because all the questions are clear, right? So you mentioned that yourself. You like to kind of stack your appointments and build them up to the point where they understand. Now, Leni, what do you recommend based on what you know about us?
Well, that's my educational background. You know, you're right. People go to the internet today. People are very internet savvy. And they say to me, well, have you ever heard of Dave Ramsey? I said, oh, of course I have. And he promotes long-term care. He doesn't sell it, but he recommends long-term care. He says things like, you have to do something to protect your nest egg. That's what he promotes, okay? Other people like Susie Orman, she's actually had the same kind of experience that I had. She was a caregiver for her mother for years, okay? So I understand her, reaction. She says, this is a wonderful product to look at. It's not for everybody. And that's the point. The interesting thing, though, is not for everybody. What's happened in the past 10 years is the not for everybody plans have expanded so much into different concepts, not necessarily the traditional long-term care that everybody is, familiar with, buying a monthly benefit over a period of time, something like that. There are plans that are good for 40-year-olds, are good for 50-year-olds, are good for 60-year-olds, are good for 90-year-olds. And so there's always a fit. There's always a place to go because most people say, oh, I'm too old or I'm too ill to do anything like that. And that's part of the misunderstanding. So when when you say, I educate, my goal is to educate people. If they don't want to move forward with these plans, my answer is make sure that you have a plan in place and make sure that your family knows what your plan is, because they're the ones that are going to have to come back and take care of you. Okay? In my background, I would have taken care of my mother no matter what. Okay? And my family knows that too. But it was a struggle. It was difficult. And there could have been an easier way, not in those years, but there's an easier way now to help yourself and help your family to take care of you.
Yeah, it's very important to think about the others, like you said, because it's a trickle effect, right? It's like you throw the pebble in the water and it just ripples out. You don't realize you're sick, you're dying, you're getting old, you're incapacitated, but you may be around for 3 or 4 years of somebody needing to take care of you. And if there's no plan, I've watched it with lots of families with my Medicare clients. When they all found out Medicare was not paying for it, they start to fight amongst each other. And usually there's one that comes out. It could be 3 siblings, 4 siblings, but it's never 2 or 3 people saying, all right, we're going to take turns taking care. And it is a huge burden on that one individual. And like you said, I did the same thing for my father. I built a room in the house for him so he didn't have to go into long-term care facility or any of the nursing homes. And I worked from home. So I was there all the time. But that's a lot of work, and not everybody can do that, right? So if you have some kind of plan that at least diminishes the burden even a little bit, right? Like you said, like half the cost, and you can have somebody come in for a few days a week so you could actually live as a 35, 40-year-old family member and not just be taking care of your mom or dad.
Exactly.
There's a lot of stress that's involved in that. So you mentioned a lot of different products and things, and that there's probably something for almost everybody, which I think is awesome because back in the day, it was pretty cut and dry. And I know that recently I've gotten calls from people that said, they heard about this hybrid type of plan. What do you think about it? It's part insurance, it's part, long-term care. And I'll defer to you. Do you know anything about these hybrid policies?
I know a lot about them. So they're basically life insurance or annuities attached to a long-term care policy. And when people say to me, when I mention them, because sometimes the hybrid plans, or called linked plans or hybrid plans, are actually more reliable and better for a client than traditional long-term care. And they say, well, I don't want life insurance. Okay. And I say to them, this is not about life insurance. You're not going to get $1 million life insurance policy attached to a long-term care policy. It affords certain benefits. It's hard to go into the details. Some of them are guaranteed premiums, never to go up. There is a death benefit or full death benefit or a partial death benefit if you never use the policy, or if you use part of the policy, it's a partial death benefit. So there is an advantage. And what's the advantage of having it? Because as I said, it's never going to be $1 million. Okay. It allows for, after your demise, the family to have funds for burial expenses, outstanding bills, settling different things after at your death. And so they're excellent plans. They didn't exist years ago. Now they're on fire. Okay. But they're not the only plans that are out there. Okay. So, there are traditional plans, there are linked plans, there are life insurance plans with chronic riders and long-term care riders. There are annuity and equity plans. There are home care plans. I mean, because I've done this for so long and I understand within 5 minutes, if I talk to a client, I could actually tell them what direction to go in. But I don't say, you must go in this direction. I say, look, I understand. Let's talk about funding. Are you better going in this direction? And I say, based upon all the information that you've given me, this is a good direction for you to go in. You have to make the decision. You can talk to your family as well, but you have to make the decision. I'll give you all the alternatives. I'll give you everything you need to make a decision. And you decide.
All right. So as we get close to wrapping this up, because I know we can tell stories forever, If somebody's 55, 60 years old and they're starting to contemplate this, what would you tell them? If you could sit with every person that was, let's say 60 years old, what would you tell every 60-year-old before they started thinking about long-term care to help them get off on the right foot?
So I explained to them they're in a sandwich generation situation. They have children, they have parents, they have grandparents, and if they're lucky, they have great grandparents. Okay? If they're in their working years, there are plans now where you could buy the long-term care plan and pay it off before retirement. Okay? It's not a you pay until you go on claim or you pay until you die now. You can pay a single pay. You can do 5 pay, 10 pay, 20 pay, or you can pay for a lifetime. Okay? So what I say to younger clients is look at the plans that will serve you best while you're in your working years. Now, the thing is, when you're in retirement, there's a bigger funding nest egg as far as qualified funds are concerned. But when you're in your working years, your qualified funds, and I'll define qualified funds, may not be as big. So we talk about how to fund this, short-term funding. And so by the time you turn 65, you are no longer paying for this and you own the policy for life. And these are basically linked benefit and hybrid plans. There are also plans where traditional plans where if you're young enough, because if you're older, it takes a big chunk into the premium. But if you're younger, you could do something called return of premium, which kind of mimics hybrids and linked benefit plans, so that if you never use these plans, somebody inherits all of the premiums. If you use part of the plans, they inherit part of the premiums. So that's what I say to people in their 40s, 50s. We work out a plan. We don't say what this plan fits all. This is the only plan for you. But you really, as an advisor, have to have an understanding of what's out in the market. You really do. You yourself, as an advisor, have to be so educated so that when a client says to you, well, I'm going to be working 10 more years. Don't sell them a traditional long-term care. Sell them talk to them about a linked plan that you can pay off in a shorter amount of time. So there's a great deal that goes on to planning here. Okay.
Yeah, I could see you could probably talk about it for hours because everyone's going to have a case by case different scenario. But one thing I want to point out, and I guarantee you agree, is I've sold all kinds of insurance in my life. And as a Medicare agent now, the last 18 years, yeah, I feel good when I sell someone a policy and it covers their surgery. But the few people that I did sell long-term care that actually used it, and the people that got life insurance from me that actually used it, and I wasn't even in that business anymore, they all reached out and found me and thanked me so much. They were so grateful. Nobody has ever called me from Medicare and said, thank you so much for selling me, this Medicare supplement plan or this Medicare Advantage plan. It just doesn't happen. But that changes people's lives. What you're doing when it does happen, yes, it doesn't happen to everybody, but the people it does, it changes people's lives. And it could be a minor change and you have a plan, or it could be this thing where your family gets torn apart and who's taking care of mom and she's not living with me and I live too far away and all these crazy things. So you tell me, I mean, is this why you're still in the business? Because I see you smiling. I'm feeling like it is. It's very rewarding.
So I would tell you on the average of once a week. Remember, I've been doing this for over 20 years. So I have files built up for all these 20 some odd years. Last week, I got a call from a client who I wrote a policy 20 years ago, and they called me. First of all, they say, well, who do I call? I say, you call me. And they have my mobile phone. And 20 years later, he calls me and he says, oh, my spouse has an issue. And I say, hi. And I give him their name. I say, hi, Arlene, or hi, Bill, or how are you? Because I have their files. I pull out their files. Right? And the answer to what you said is true. Nobody ever says to me, I'm so sorry you sold me this policy. What I hear is my spouse really needed this. I never could have done this on my own. So I'm very appreciative of you. Also, people call me all these years and say, I bought this policy. Could you explain this portion to me? And we go back over it because that's my background. My background is in education and I do it with a passion. So I have no choice. I have no choice.
Beautiful. Very well said. So if anybody out there that's listening needs help with this type of stuff, how do they reach out to you to get your expertise, to have you answer questions and help them in any way, Leni? How can they contact?
Well, I mean, the best way to contact me, I guess, is my mobile. Or my email. I don't have it up on the screen. I'll just give you my mobile very quickly.
Take care of that for you. Don't worry.
Okay. So they can reach me on my phone. I text. Do you want me to give my mobile now, or do you want me to?
Go for it.
Okay. I'll give you my mobile. That's the best way to reach me. So it's a 561 number, 561-305-1812. That's my mobile number. Everything after that, I would reach back out to them. They can also text me. Sometimes people don't like to talk on the phone. Text me, okay? If you reach out to me and call me on my mobile, 561-305-1812, I will consequently reach back out to you, get your email address, and send you all that initial information that I talked about in the beginning.
Beautiful. Very well said. I couldn't have asked for a better episode. Great sharing stories with you. I just love when it comes from the heart and it's not a pitch about this great product that's going to help people. It's a combination of everything. Something you believe in, something that you've lived. So that's the end of this episode of the Insurance Wise Guys. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Leni, for joining us today. And I promise everybody out there, if for some reason you didn't get that phone number, you could reach out to me and I will put you in touch with Leni myself. Thanks again, guys.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Insurance Wise Guys. If today's conversation made you think, good, that's exactly the point. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it, because the best thing you can do for people you care about is make sure they have the right information before they need it. I'm Paul Barrett. Stay wise, stay protected, and we'll see you next time.